Welcome to Beyond the Code, the podcast where industry experts and brilliant legal minds discuss the impact of new emerging technologies. I'm your host, Yitzi Hammer, a lawyer and tech enthusiast. Join us as we explore the legal, regulatory, and ethical issues surrounding AI, blockchain, and more. Get ready to go beyond the code and stay ahead of the game. All right, Avishai, this is really exciting to have you on Beyond the Code. We've known each other for quite a while, since our school days, and I've admired your very illustrious career. You are also, I think, the most active privacy expert I know on social media.
Wow, that's quite the title. Thank you.
Pretty religiously, always have a good meme to attach to your posts, and are rocking on the emojis. I don't know if you've tried GPT-4's post instructions, but if you tell it to like draft you a post for LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, like it does it like to the mark with emojis and with hashtags. So might be putting you out of business soon.
No, absolutely. I actually have an interesting story about my I had a little faux pas with my posts, and I'm not afraid to admit. First of all, thank you very much for having me on, Yitzi. It's a great pleasure, and I've been following your career as well, and it's always great to chat with friends, and certainly people who have a very interesting take on what's going on in the world today. But my story about ChatGPT, this was like literally when it came out, and it wasn't even, I don't even think it was like a week or 2 weeks old. Epic Games, which creates the Fortnite game, received a fine from the FTC in the United States for violation of the FTC Act, and they said it was for children's online privacy practices that weren't up to par. And I asked ChatGPT to write me a post about it, not realizing that ChatGPT's information was only up to date up until, at that time, the end of 2020. But and this, I think, points to one of the sort of questions we can potentially get into it of being able to audit the source of the information. When I asked it to give me a post about the fine against Epic Games that happened yesterday, it was very happy to spit me out a post, completely fabricating I don't know if it's a fabrication or information that was not up to date. Yeah, and so that's why it's so important to sort of take this stuff with a grain of salt, fact check, audit the information, and make sure that you're getting correct information. It's a little bit like relying on Wikipedia for like an academic article.
No, I was going to say an intern.
An intern.
I feel like ChatGPT is just like a really good intern. Like they're quick, but you have to check all their work.
I like that.
Anyways,
and they're cheaper. And they're cheaper.
They're cheaper, $20 a month.
Cheaper.
I don't think you're gonna find an intern for $20 a month. But back to your accolades. So you're the most active privacy expert I know on social media. Initially headed up privacy at Astersons, which is a prominent UK law firm, and today you're the head of advisory services,
director of advisory services at Privacy Team.
Director of advisory services at Privacy Team, which is like a really awesome consultancy practice based here in Tel Aviv, which advises like all the unicorns in the tech ecosystem on their privacy concerns. Correct?
Absolutely. That's we are based in Tel Aviv, but we do definitely advise global companies. So we have Israeli-based, led companies, but we also have companies from all around the world who come to us because they understand that we understand not only the privacy, but also the tech being sort of in the heart of the startup nation. And we also actually recently just opened an office in Melbourne, Australia. Oh, wow. So yeah, very exciting stuff going on there.
I know in addition to being an Israeli lawyer, you're also licensed practice law in the UK, and you recently passed an exam for being an expert in Canadian privacy laws, correct?
Correct. Wow,
Yeah.
you're very up to date. That literally happened like a couple of days ago.
Okay, so you're definitely an expert in privacy, and I'm very excited to have some conversations today around privacy and AI, which is one of the main topics that this podcast purports to discuss and to be on top of. And there's certainly a lot of issues with privacy within the realms of AI. My initial reaction to ChatGPT was like, oh my God, this is so cool. I didn't give much thought to, what the type of details and information I was sharing with it. I was just kind of like throwing all different kinds of things into the mix and seeing what came out and, being continually impressed. And then a few weeks after ChatGPT launched, I went to a fintech conference here in Tel Aviv, which was sponsored by Microsoft, and they had one of their AI engineers was giving a lecture on Microsoft's OpenAI Azure product, which is essentially, Microsoft is part owner of OpenAI, so they basically integrated their own version of ChatGPT into the Azure ecosystem. And the last slide on his presentation was privacy and regulation. So, okay, this is interesting. And he's like, let me tell you why ChatGPT shouldn't be your go-to application if you intend to use it for, business purposes. Basically, he says anything, whether you're paying for whether you have the paid subscription or the free subscription, anything that you're feeding into the AI is ultimately being used to continue to train its being able to train its data models, right? ChatGPT is what's called an LLM, model, large language model, large language large
Yeah.
language learning model. I knew there was like another L in there. Large language learning model, and basically they train it on lots and lots of text, and then after having millions and millions of words thrown in there, they could ask the AI, okay, what do you take 5 words? What do you think the next word is going to be? So in addition to the billions of text that was thrown in prior to its launch, it's now taking all of our own prompts and using them to continue to learn and better itself. So essentially, it's like having a third person in the room with you. And if you're sharing anything that you think should remain confidential, whether it's your client's data or your own personal data, then you're sharing it basically with a third party. And when I looked at their privacy policy and some of their facts on their site, they said, don't share anything that you don't want somebody else seeing, because we do use this to train our data models. And Microsoft, excuse me, Microsoft said that with their Azure product, it doesn't do that. In other words, like any input that you give, they're kind of like sandboxing it on the side, and they're not using it to continue to train their data models. And while ChatGPT does allow you to delete your information, you can't delete specific prompts. You don't have like a clear dashboard for viewing that. And there's still a risk that it's going to be thrown into the pool and kind of be mixed with everything else. Whereas in Azure, it's completely manageable. So there's definitely like major privacy issues there.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what I spoke about before with my my story with when I used ChatGPT for a LinkedIn post, that's sort of the output side of it, right? The dangers, quote unquote, in the output, and being wary or conscious of what you're getting out of it. But what you're pointing to now is the issue of the input. I think there are 3 parts to this that we need to think about it in 3 ways, right? There's the output. The input you certainly need to be wary of as well in terms of what information you're feeding into there. Are you feeding your customer information? Are you feeding your personal information? I actually read on LinkedIn, and there was someone who posted about the fact that there was a false article up on them that they had died. Okay, I think that they were in an accident and they had died, but in fact they survived. And when they prompted ChatGPT to say, "What about so and so," which was them, the AI gave information that yes, this person died in a car accident on such and such date. But it just kind of goes to show you that like once something is out there on the internet, ChatGPT is going to go and find it, and you don't really have a way to correct that information, audit that information. Someone who asks for a prompt and just gets fed this information, unless they're going and actually doing the legwork to go and check that, they don't necessarily know, have no way of knowing whether it's true or not.
Yeah, as far as the output goes, like there's no question that, it's not truthful. And an interesting question would be, typically when you look at any data model, if to the extent that it trains off of your personal data, you have the ability to ask it to delete your personal data. But here, presumably the any data about you that would be in their data model would have been taken from third parties. Okay, I don't know, some other site where I would have given them my information. And assuming I go now to those third parties and ask them to delete my data, would it be deleted also from the data models that ChatGPT is training off of, or would I have to go to them directly?
Oh wow, that's a really good question. I think it's too soon to know, and I think I think the answer depends on, which is an open question that we don't know, on how current and up to date their so basically the way the model works, right, is it will, when it wants to train itself on new data, it'll either take it from the prompts or it'll scrape data from sources around the internet. So it'll have a crawler, a bot out there scraping information from the internet. So I think it will probably the question of whether the information is up to date will depend on whether they've received any information input from users, or whether they've had an up to date scraper. How recently have they scraped their sources in order to gain the information?
So I'm looking on OpenAI's website now, and the first question that they ask there is, who can view my conversations? So they state, as part of our commitment to safe and responsible AI, we review conversations to improve our systems and to ensure the content complies with our policies and safety requirements. So the first thing to know is that any input that you put in, somebody's reading and reviewing, and opining on. Second question is, will you use my conversations for training? And the answer is yes. Your conversations may be reviewed by our AI trainers to improve our systems. So basically, anything that you input in there is staying on their system as part of their data models that they continue to train on. Can you delete my data? Yes, please follow the data deletion process that we discussed. And finally, can you delete specific prompts? No, please don't share any sensitive information in your conversations. So this isn't something that they like put bold, underlined, and when you enter onto the prompt page the first time. This is only something that, if you dig deep in the facts and the terms and conditions that you'd find, I think most people aren't aware of the fact that they're essentially, sharing these conversations with third parties. And it's definitely something that people should be aware of, especially if you're using it for business purposes. I use it often in my legal practice, and while I don't share my my clients' personal data, potentially I could if I wasn't aware of the sensitivity here. So it's definitely something that people should be aware of. And
yeah, absolutely. I think that I think that we're at this stage because this technology is so new, right? We're at the stage of people understanding the potential of it, but also training people on how to use it responsibly. So if you think about I don't remember when it was launched, but if you think about something like Wikipedia, right, which is an open encyclopedia, anyone can go and get information from Wikipedia. But at the end of the day, it's a self-reporting tool, right? I can create a page, I can edit a page. Yes, there's a little bit of editing, but we can, we basically it's a non-edited information. So it's great for looking up, what was Napoleon's favorite thing to eat. But when you need things that are much more consequential, then you'll go to more respected sources, or you'll view the sources sort of at the bottom. And I think that we're going through a similar process now with ChatGPT, where people and in terms of Wikipedia, like people will understand, like if you say to someone, I got this information from Wikipedia, then they know, okay, it's probably correct, but we need to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. And if I need it for a professional context, I'll go to a more reputable source than Wikipedia, or I'll look up where the information on Wikipedia actually came from. And I think that we're going through a similar process now with tools like ChatGPT and other AI LLM tools that you were mentioning before, which is people are going through an education process. We're learning what it can be used for, what it shouldn't be used for, what people should be wary about, how people should be wary about using it, and sort of what are the societal norms around using these types of tools. And I think that it'll take a little bit of time, but people are kind of understanding, okay, I can use it for like a generic post on social media, but maybe I shouldn't use it in my court pleadings when I'm putting together information about, what are the, I don't know, what's the likelihood of someone, I don't know, throw something out there, being headbutted by a bull.
You shouldn't be using it to obtain anything that we would attribute any degree of truthfulness to or accuracy. It's basically a lot of fluff, nice fluff.
Nice fluff.
No,
it'll definitely shorten processes. You just need to make sure that you're using it for the right process. And obviously, in terms of the input prompts, think about those as well. I think at the end of the day, it'll be interesting to see which model becomes the Google to search, right? Which model becomes...
Have you tried Google's AI?
I haven't.
It
I think it's only... It sucks. Oh, okay. I think it only became available... We're both based in Israel. I mean, you could use a VPN, obviously, but I think it only became available in Israel like
middle of last week. Yeah. So I tried it out on the day it came out. And like, again, a couple of times since then, not a very nice user interface. Like, how ChatGPT kind of just like types out the answer for you.
Yeah.
So Bard just kind of like goes silent for a minute and then spits out like a full answer. A lot of rejection.
So you like the
it gives
like
it
the
more
typewriter
touch when you see something coming out. Yeah, I love that. But I will say that from a privacy perspective, I took a look at their privacy policy.
Okay.
And as would be expected, to help with the quality and improve our products, human reviewers read, annotate, and process your Bard conversations. Human reviewers. We take steps to protect your privacy as part of this process. This includes disconnecting your conversations with Bard from your Google account before reviewers see or annotate them. In other words, we're still going to review everything, but we're not necessarily going to connect it with your personal details. And then finally, and this time in bold, please do not include information that can be used to identify you or others in your Bard conversations, which may explain... just for fun, I spat your name into ChatGPT to see like what kind of questions it would suggest that I ask you, and I came out with like a whole bunch of questions based on your background. And I put the same question into Bard, and he's like, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. But it could be because I put your name in there, and then it refused to take like any names. And then when I took your name out, then it gave me something just like super generic, not exciting.
That's very interesting. By the way, this reminds me a lot, the conversation that we're having right now about these language models reminds me a lot of the conversation we were having like 2 years ago about home voice assistants. Do you remember that conversation where we were like, okay,
also AI, by the way.
Also AI. Also, there was a huge story in I can't remember which. There was one of the countries in Europe that like took this and basically, if you think about it, so voice assistants, we're talking about things like Alexa, and there was a huge sort of splash and regulators getting involved when it was like discovered, and I'm using air quotes for those who are listening to the podcast, discovered that people were actually reviewing these recordings. And it's something that's in your house. It's just sitting on your counter and listening all the time, including to conversations that could potentially be very sensitive. And then again, there was this sort of reckoning and questioning that people were saying, like, oh my God, these technologies are amazing, but they're super invasive, and we're not sure about the practices, and are people listening or people not listening? There was an order by, I think, the Irish regulator. It could have been another one, but I believe it was the Irish regulator, to immediately stop all human reviewing of this of the recordings before while the regulator did an investigation. So there was like this whole conversation around it, and which is good, by the way. I think we should be having these conversations, and I think that it's important for people to the main reason I think we should be having them is, number one, to understand what regulation we should tailor to these companies when they're using these products, and how they're using them in order to improve their own products and services, because I think technology is important. I'm not an advocate for completely banning all technologies, but I do think that it's good in order to have a conversation about what the right regulatory framework is for these types of tools, and B, I think it's really good for people to understand and be aware of some of the risks that are associated with them, right? So, using a voice assistant carries risk that you're going to have sensitive information being picked up by this assistant that could potentially be reviewed by humans somewhere, and people may be listening into your conversations. Even if it's not nefarious, it's still, kind of disturbing that there's someone else in your living room potentially listening to your conversations. And I think that the conversation that we're having now about, we had that initial like honeymoon period of, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and people are just inputting anything and everything into these systems, and it's been a couple of months, or almost a couple of months since they were launched to the public, and now we're having this mature conversation of, okay, these technologies are great, but let's realize that they carry risk with them, and let's understand and educate ourselves and be a little more responsible about how we use them, what we use them for, what information are we putting into them, what's that information being used for, et cetera, et cetera. So I think these conversations are super important in order to have people realize and understand and educate themselves, right? The public, because these technologies are open to the public. So educate themselves on some of the limitations, some of the risks. Again, not to say, they should be completely banned. Like, we've had a suggestion recently from one of the regulators, and we can get into that.
Was a suggestion, or was that is that being enforced? I think you're referring to the Italian regulator.
So
that put a ban on ChatGPT.
Correct. So the Italian regulator recently put a ban on ChatGPT for use, and if people want, you can is an interesting exercise that I did last week, is put on a VPN via Italy and go into ChatGPT. You see it's completely blocked. They won't allow you to use it, at least as of when I tried. And I think that's one approach, that's one way of going. I don't think it's a permanent ban.
From what I read, the Italian regulator pointed out like 4 aspects of existing privacy regulation where ChatGPT wasn't compliant. The first is in terms of age gating. So they have no age gating when people sign up to their products. You essentially just pop in an email address, and then you get access, at least rudimentary access to the product. And as this is contrary to privacy laws. The second thing that they notice is that the information isn't accurate. But again, we discussed this, like, it's not accurate because it's training on old data models. I don't think that there's that there's a legal obligation for the information to be accurate, just that it's, that you're clear that it's not accurate. And that actually is one thing that they put very clearly under like the main page where you put your prompts in, like, please note that this is, perhaps not accurate. Um, then the third thing is that people haven't been told that their data was collected. So like we discussed earlier, unless you're going to click around the whole site looking for it, it doesn't say anywhere very clearly that the information that you're putting in is being processed in any kind of way. And finally, and I really wanted to try and not get too technical in the podcast, but unfortunately, it's a technical term. They claim that there's no legal basis for processing. You're a privacy lawyer, so you know all about the legal bases for processing. You know that if you do want to process somebody's personal data, you need to rely on one of them. And from my understanding, ChatGPT doesn't rely on any of the 6 justifications that are available. I think they go for legitimate interest, which is kind of like a basket justification, but you'd be able to speak to that better than I would. But in any event, it's not like they're saying like we have to make up laws. Privacy regimes in general, but in Europe in particular, have been notoriously clear on what is and isn't acceptable. And what they're saying is there are rules for these things, and you're not playing by the rules until you're able to comply. We're not letting you. We're not providing access to your software, which is, I think, probably better than going after them with a big fine, because they could have done that as well. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think better from whose perspective?
um, More mature of the regulator. I think to say like you obviously didn't think this one out. Like, why don't you go putting you in timeout for a little bit, come back when you're ready, as opposed to saying like, oh, look at you, you're acting contrary to privacy regulations in Europe. We're gonna slap you with a massive fine. So, in a sense, I feel like what they did is commendable.
So I think, yeah, I mean, I think if you think about sort of what the regulator in Italy did, if you think about regulators in general, right, they have a few tools in their toolbox, but for our purposes, they can basically do, when they find a company that's in violation, again, they have a number of tools, but one of the 2 main ones are either give them a fine or order them to stop processing. That's basically according to GDPR. And I think that I completely agree with you that I think that you called it more mature, I call it more sort of effective. The more effective tool is, people think that the fines are like, what the companies are most afraid of and what they're working to avoid, and they attract all the big headlines. But if you think about it, actually the ban on use is much more effective, because basically what you're saying is, forget a fine that for these companies like Google, Meta, Microsoft, whatever, they're like a drop in the bucket. Forget the fines. You cannot carry out your business in our territory is a much more sort of effective tool. And like what you're saying, I mean, I like your sort of comparing it to dealing with a little child, right? You're on a timeout now. You're not ready. Come back to us when you're ready. And I think that's a much more sort of effective tool. And I'm very interested to see how how Microsoft is going to respond. They've already said that they disagree with the ruling. I expect that they'll probably challenge it legally. But in any event, it's gonna sort of, I hope what it does is have them rethink some of the practices and hopefully deal with some of the issues that we've been discussing now of the risks of using these tools.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to watch. Like, I would have thought, I don't know when this came out. I think it was like 2 weeks ago. I would have thought that it would bring like a domino effect of having other jurisdictions follow suit. But since we haven't seen that yet, maybe, they're letting the Italians play it out for everybody else, and hoping that if they force Microsoft to comply, then everybody else will benefit from that as well. But it'll definitely be interesting to watch. The last question I want to ask, which is, I think both of us, we're not academics. While it's important for us to see these products evolve from a regulatory and legal standpoint, we both advise clients from a practical standpoint, and we want to see our clients be able to grow and succeed despite all of these regulations and restrictions. So what I would like to ask you is, from a practical standpoint, what steps can companies take to be more responsible in this post ChatGPT world, both if they're consumers, in other words, if they have if their employees are using ChatGPT and other AI tools on a day-to-day basis to streamline their work, or if they're companies that are creating AI products on their own?
Well, I first of all, thank you for that question. I really, really love that question, because I think that it's it's important that we stay on top of the regulatory trends for our clients. But I and we at Privacy Team very much believe in that these, at the end of the day, companies need to do business, and they need recommendations, and they need, actionable insights and actionable recommendations in terms of how, what do I do tomorrow morning? So I think it's an excellent question. I think that the main thing that I would say is, I think that we, as exciting as these new tools are, and I'm not advocating not using them, I think they're great, and I think they should be used, and I think they should be integrated. I would caution companies and just tell them to take a step back, take a breath, and think a little bit more critically about what these, the practices, like the exercise that you did before, we started this recording, of actually going in, looking at the terms of some of these services, potentially, if they're, they have enough leverage and they're a big enough business and they're looking to integrate it into their tool, reaching out to Microsoft, reaching out to OpenAI. I know that may sound crazy to people, but believe it or not, they do have a legal team that does, negotiate with companies on their terms and on their conditions. I know also from some negotiations that I've done on behalf of my clients for integrating OpenAI, is that, for example, the use of data for training their models is something they're willing to negotiate on, and have a conversation about those practices, if obviously if you're on a paid model. And I think that, so I think that's something that needs to be integrated into the processes. So not just, take the initial rush of, there's this new cool tool out there, let's go and use it and integrate it into everything, but actually take a step back and have a conversation, chat with your, if you're in a company, chat with your legal team and ask them whether there are any restrictions around this. Make sure that, people are aware that this is something that's going to be used, and exactly how it's going to be used. So that's, if you're in a company and you're hearing this and you're thinking, how, I want to integrate these tools, what do I need to do? Just, be conscious of the issues that we've spoken about, and make sure that you're comfortable with what these tools are doing. If you're an individual, I would say something along the same lines, which is just be conscious of it, right? Be conscious in the same way, we gave the example before of the voice assistants. Maybe don't have them on all the time around the house. Maybe don't have them, listening in by default. So the same thing goes for these tools. Maybe don't input that, sensitive health information that you just have a question about, a health condition. Maybe don't input that at this point in time, and be a little bit more sort of cautious. I'm not saying, again, I'm not advocating for banning them or not using these tools, because I think they are an important part of our lives now. But just to, read up a
Use them
little bit,
responsibly.
educate, use them responsibly. Exactly. And if you, and ask questions. And the thing that I like to say to people when I do privacy training, and this goes for any tool that you're looking to use, whether it's the newest cutting edge kind of AI language model, or a different, a vendor that's going to make your calendar easier to synchronize and schedule meetings. Any tool, the way that I like to think about it, and I like to tell people to think about it, is think about, if it's not your data going into there, if it's someone else's data, so then think about whether you would be comfortable in putting your data into that tool. Or if you are thinking about yourself, think about whether you would be comfortable putting your child's data or one of your parents' data into that tool. And are you comfortable with what the company says they're doing in practice being done to your data, your child's data, your parents' data? So just sort of put yourselves in the shoes of someone who you care about, and ask yourself the question, would I be comfortable with the practices being done on their data? And if the answer is yes, then you can feel a little bit more confident about it, because at the end of the day, we're stewards of other people's information, and we need to use it responsibly. And so, putting yourself in the other person's shoes and asking that question, I think, is a good exercise, because it's always easier to say, oh, it's someone else's information, I don't really care. But once you put yourselves in their shoes and you say, maybe I wouldn't be so comfortable if it was my information that this was being, that was being processed in this way, then you'll be a little bit more cautious. And I think that, again, that's true across the board with any practices relating to privacy and regulation. I think that's a really good sort of go-to question, go-to test as to whether you would feel comfortable using this tool or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another good practice that could go hand in hand with what you suggested is, after you have that conversation with your lawyer, with your privacy expert, internally with your team, it's important to have something that's communicated to all your employees. So I know that in the world of open source technology is something that a lot of companies either integrate into their products or create open source for various reasons. And open source has a wide breadth of licenses available that you could distribute the product under. And some of them are what's called copyright, and some of them are what's called copyleft. Okay. Copyleft is the more libertarian approach, where basically anything distributed under a copyleft license sort of contaminates the other IP that it's distributed with. So companies are generally wary of which open source licenses they integrate into their product. And in order to ensure that this is communicated across the board, companies typically draft open source policies where they tell employees, these are the type of licenses that we're comfortable with. These are the ones that we're not comfortable with. These are the ones, this is where we can integrate these type of licenses. This is where we can't. In certain cases, you set up a committee that you could discuss it with internally. And I think that the same work stream could be applied vis-a-vis AI products, where companies should, have these conversations and then integrate them into a company-wide policy that's distributed among all employees, and they can see very clearly, these are the products that have been vetted by our team and that we allow you to integrate. I know a lot of companies use, for example, Firefly's AI, which is like a note taker that you have on all your video calls that will, turn all of your conversations into actionable items. So these are the technologies that we're comfortable with, that we vetted. These are the ones that we're not comfortable with. These are the ones, if to the extent that you want to introduce a new type of AI tool, this is the committee that you need to discuss it with. But basically, this is something that we've recommended to our clients, and we've drafted for a few of them already, just having some kind of like AI rules vis-a-vis company employees, and then make sure that they're clearly accessible to anybody.
Yeah, I think that's also an excellent recommendation. And the one thing I would add to that is if companies are looking to integrate this into their product, so it's available to customers, I think it's also really important to make sure that customers have the option to turn it off because they're opt out because so that's really important to make sure that you have that worked into the tool so that you're not forcing it on everyone and then realizing that people are coming and saying, hey, wait a second, we can't use this tool because our national regulator said we're not allowed to use it.
Excellent point. I think that we could wrap it up with that. Anything else you want to
add? Thank you. This has been fun. I really enjoyed chatting AI and privacy and new and emerging technologies and the different approaches that we need to kind of employ and think about. I hope that people take away from this conversation that what we're recommending is not to stop using these tools, but just to exercise caution and a good, healthy dose of skepticism, and just be conscious of it, and don't get swept up in the hype, and think when you're using these new tools. So that's my message.
Thank you. And just lastly, how could our listeners get in touch with you? Where could they follow you and get access to your content?
So like you said in the beginning, I am very active on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out, connect. You can see all my content there. Also feel free to DM me, and I love to have conversations with interesting people just like you, Yitzi. So feel free to reach out. I would love to chat about these topics or anything else that anyone wants to chat about.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Avishai.
Thank you, Yitzi. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Code. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share with your friends, and to tune in again next week for more fun and insightful conversation.